Hello everyone, welcome to the JW Review. My name is Mike Felker, and this week we are looking at study article number 28 from the July 2022 Watchtower Study Edition. And we're just doing weekly reviews where we study the scriptures, open up the Watchtower, and compare it with what the scriptures have to teach. If you're new joining us, welcome. I'm really glad you're here. Just so you know about my background, I am not a Jehovah's Witness. I am not an ex-Jehovah's Witness either. I am simply a follower of Christ doing this because so many people have found these reviews to be helpful, and that is why I press on and continue to do these. These next couple of weeks, we are going to be taking a deep dive into Bible prophecy, and we actually just a matter of weeks ago did a deep dive, mostly related to the book of Revelation. So I'd highly recommend going and checking those out. I think we did about 3 different weeks going through the book of Revelation in a pretty good bit of detail, answering a lot of these questions about who's the beast, what are these heads representing, who is Babylon the Great, things like that. So I'd highly recommend checking those podcasts out because we're going to be doing a lot of that here, but I can't exactly rehash everything that I went into in those videos, so those will be a little bit of a prerequisite to check this out. But I'm going to at least describe as best I can what some of my viewpoints are and what I think the Bible is teaching as it relates to some of these topics. So if you see here from the cover of the Watchtower, you see the statue, and this is really referring to Daniel's vision, and you also see the beast with the harlot. That's referring to Revelation, and there's also parts in Daniel referring to something similar as well. You see the 4 horsemen. So you can kind of see that the Watchtower is really setting the stage for some Bible prophecy discussions. And to no surprise, to try to tell us that we are living in the final part of the last days, or the final part of the last days, however many times you can say last and final. That's what they are trying to convey. It's a bit of a boy who cried wolf situation, but it is what it is, and we're going to try to show you in these reviews that that is simply not the case, that there is no biblical evidence that we are living in the final part of the last days. My viewpoint is, which I think is the Bible's viewpoint, is that we don't simply know if we're living in the last days or not. The Bible does not tell us. That is basically my viewpoint, and you're welcome to ask me any questions about that if you would like. So let's go ahead and get into this study article. It is titled, "The Kingdom is in Place." And the key text is Revelation 11:15, which says, "Then the 7th angel sounded, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, 'The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he will reign forever and ever.'" Paragraph 1. When you look at world conditions, do you find it difficult to maintain a positive outlook? Family ties are fraying. You know, it's really interesting they say that. Family ties are fraying. And you know, what's the cause of that? Well, there's a whole lot of different causes of that. But as it relates to the Jehovah's Witnesses, what happens when a faithful Jehovah's Witness start to question things like, you know, what is the meaning of this generation in Matthew chapter 24? And they go through and look and see how many times the organization has flip-flopped that into now they have this utter ridiculous notion of the overlapping generations. And it is a ridiculous notion. It's indefensible biblically. I'm not saying that as an insult. It really is ridiculous. So what happens when you start to realize that, and then you start to think, well, I want to ask my faithful Jehovah's Witness friends about this, and my family, and the elders, and I want to go talk to people about this and kind of reason through it. Well, next thing you know it, you're finding yourself sitting before a judicial committee asking you if you trust in the faithful slave, right? And you say, well, I don't know if I'm trusting in the faithful slave or not. I'm just trying to read the Bible and try to come up with the best interpretation I can. Well, you know, let's say you get disfellowship for causing division and sect, which are really just you asking questions and trying to reason through these things. But you get disfellowship, and what ends up happening? Your family ties get severed because you're now being shunned for the rest of your life by your friends and family because you started questioning some things, right? Something like the meaning of this generation. And this kind of thing happens time and time and time and time again. So family ties are fraying. Yeah, there's a whole host of reasons, especially what's going on out in the world today, that family ties are fraying for all kinds of reasons, wicked reasons, sinful reasons, right? But the Watchtower is actually contributing to that through the disfellowshipping and shunning policy. So who's part of the problem now? Sounds like the Watchtower is. So rather than trying to establish family ties, even in the midst of disagreements and difficulties and trying to reconcile your faith with the Scriptures, instead of trying to hold it all together and let's all be unified in ways that we can be unified, the Watchtower actually creates disunity by their shunning policies. So they're a part of the problem. Continuing on, people in general are becoming more and more violent, selfish, and aggressive. Look at this. Many find it difficult to trust those in authority. You know, they say these things with so little self-reflection. I mean, I can just imagine so many of you, those of you who are still in the religion, perhaps on the more faithful side of being a Jehovah's Witness, starting to notice a little bit of cognitive dissonance, right? Because you'll hear things like, we have no leaders, right? Jehovah's Witnesses may say, we have no leaders, but yet we still follow those taking the lead. So you'll hear things like that, and this starts to create a little bit of cognitive dissonance. But these are things that lead you to lose trust with those in authority, because make no mistake, the governing body, those are the ones in authority that you are to trust in, right? And so you see the Watchtower coming out with all these different things like the overlapping generations and all these different changes, making it difficult to really trust in their authority. I mean, how many times can they say the final part of the last days before you start to wonder, should I be trusting these men who are wrong time and time again, and they never seem to want to apologize or take responsibility for leading so many astray? But these very conditions can give you confidence. Okay, they can give you confidence. Why? Because people are acting exactly as was foretold in a remarkable prophecy about the last days. These terrible things, family ties are fraying and all these things happening, these world conditions, that gives you confidence? Where does the Bible say that? They say because people are acting exactly as was foretold in a remarkable way, or in a remarkable prophecy about the last days. And they say, well, they cite 2 Timothy 3:16. They don't say to read it, but we're going to read it. But know this, that in the last days, difficult times will come. And what last days are they talking about? Well, the Jehovah's Witnesses and many others will think that, oh, well, this is talking about our last days, the time of the end, and of course we're living in the end. But why assume that? Why assume that? Why not just take it plainly? Take it plainly and think that, okay, this is Paul writing this, right? And Paul's writing to Timothy and trying to write in such a way that Timothy would understand. And so the last days, well, that's talking about the last days in their day, in Paul's day, in Timothy's day. I mean, why doesn't that make sense? Why extrapolate that into thousands of years into the future? Why? There's no reason to. Verse 2, for men will become lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control, without gentleness, without love for good. treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness, but having denied its power. Keep away for such men as this. Okay, so we see a whole list of sins that in the last days, things are going to be difficult. And you're going to see all these things in the last days. And there's nothing here about letting this build up your confidence. That's not in the text at all. The Watchtower's inserting that into their these passages to prop up their theology, to somehow get you excited or get you thinking that, this is evidence that the Watchtower is right. I don't know, but this is not evidence of what the Watchtower is trying to say, because they say the fulfillment of this prophecy, which is impossible for any sincere person to deny, provides evidence that Jesus Christ has begun ruling as King of God's kingdom. But this is only one of the many prophecies concerning the kingdom. It will be faith-strengthening for us to review other prophecies that have been fulfilled in recent years. So, what's they're saying here, it's impossible for any sincere person to deny. Deny what? That this is talking about our day today. I mean, I don't think that's impossible to deny. I would say, well, okay, if you're going to say that, prove it. Go through the context of 2 Timothy and prove to me this is talking about our day today. I mean, you don't see enough specifics in this passage to prove that. Because the simplest explanation is that it's just referring to Paul's day, Timothy's day. And if you don't think that's true, prove otherwise. But impossible to deny is a little bit strong. And also, they say it's evidence that Jesus has begun ruling as King of God's kingdom. I mean, where is any of that in this passage? It's not there. I don't see it. Do you see it? I don't. I've got it pulled up here. Nothing about God's kingdom and Jesus being King of God's kingdom. Nothing there. Now, I'd go to other texts to talk about that, but not this text. It's not there. All right, let's go down to paragraph 3. And this is where we really started getting into some meat. The header is how to know when the kingdom was established. Paragraph 3. The prophecy found in Daniel 7:13 and 14 assures us that Christ Jesus will be the ideal ruler of God's kingdom. All right, so let's read Daniel 7:13 and 14. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days, and came near before him. And to him was given a dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every tongue might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not be taken away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. Okay, this is about as futurist as you're going to see me get as it relates to Bible prophecy, okay? So, just to introduce the book of Daniel, and we're going to get into more detail here, I think the vast majority of Daniel is finding its fulfillment in the days of Daniel and in the periods directly following Daniel and the kings mentioned in Daniel. However, now that will be kind of what theologians would term the preterist interpretation of Daniel, right? That a lot of this stuff has been fulfilled already in the past. Now, as far as what is fulfilled today or continuing to be fulfilled, one of those things, and this is where the futurist in me comes out, is things like his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. So when Jesus is established as king and given the kingdom, that kingdom is going to grow and flourish. Jesus Christ, when he came, he said things like, the kingdom is in your midst. It's right here, right? It's soon. And the reason is because Jesus, as king, is in their presence, And Jesus is going to be resurrected and given all authority in heaven and on earth. And then just a few decades later, he's going to do what he said he would do and destroy the temple, destroy Jerusalem, bring judgment upon the Jewish people for rejecting their Messiah. And then from there, the discipleship of all the nations is still being made. The kingdom is growing and expanding, right? So, yeah, so I do think the kingdom is here, it's growing, and it's been here since Jesus walked this earth. Okay, so about as futurist as you might see me get as it relates to the book of Daniel. So yeah, there's definitely themes like that in the book of Daniel, where the kingdom is here, it's growing, it's expanding, right? It's not going to be destroyed. So I just want to make sure I get that out there in the open. But one thing I want to talk about is this idea that Jesus will be the ideal ruler of God's kingdom. Well, the question is, when would that take place? Well, it's interesting, they quote here Daniel 7:13. When like a son of man was coming, and he came up to the Ancient of Days, and came near before him, and he was given a dominion, a glory, and a kingdom. So, notice Matthew 24, verse 30, and what it says. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with great power and great glory. So, what Jesus is doing here is drawing from that Son of Man vision in Daniel 7:13 and 14. But what you'll notice if you go back and read, well, if you see here, the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky, the kind of picture you might get from that is Jesus coming on the clouds to the earth. That's the picture that a lot of people may envision when they read that passage. A coming to, a descent, in other words, a descent to the earth. But go back and check out the prophecy a little more carefully. So notice, one like a son of man was coming. Okay, so you're picturing the clouds, the Son of Man coming, and you have this mental image in your mind, thinking you're interpreting Jesus, saying he's coming to the earth. But look carefully at the passage. It says, and he came up where? To the Ancient of Days. So with the clouds of heaven, Jesus is coming, and he's coming up to the Ancient of Days. And notice this. So he goes to the Ancient of Days, and he is given this kingdom that will serve him. In this kingdom that will never be taken away. So really, if we go back to Matthew 24:30, and we ask ourselves, well, when is this happening? Well, I've gone through this many, many times, right? But if you go back to the beginning of Matthew chapter 24, I think this is pretty clear that this is talking about the events leading up to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. So it makes sense here that in 24:30, this passage would be cited. Because only someone with such great authority would have this power to do what Jesus is saying he does in this whole entire passage. As far as the wind goes, look at verse 34. Truly, truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. What are all these things? Well, everything that was written up to this point. And who is this generation? Well, do a word search of this generation, and you're going to find that it's talking about to the generation right then and there, those very people in front of Jesus Christ. And if you want to see another instance of that passage, look at Matthew 26:64. This is when the high priest and the religious leaders are questioning Jesus and trying to catch him and then eventually judge him. Look at what it says. All right, so let's start in verse 63. But Jesus kept silent. This is after he's being accused and questioned. And the high priest said to him, I put you under oath by the living God, that you tell us whether you are the Christ or the Messiah, the Son of God. Look at what Jesus says. You yourself said it. Nevertheless, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. So who is Jesus talking to? Well, he was talking to the high priest. Well, the high priest is asking him, are you this person? Do you have this authority? And Jesus says, yes, I do. And you're going to see it. You're going to see it. Well, why is he going to see it? Well, he's part of this generation. And so what's he going to see? Well, he's going to see the words of Jesus being vindicated because of what Jesus said would happen in all these events in Matthew chapter 24 leading up to the destruction of the temple. These things will happen. Okay, so that's a long way of saying let's get back to paragraph 3 about Jesus being ruler of God's kingdom. Everything I just said, in essence, proves that Jesus was ruler of God's kingdom in the first century. In the first century. Watchtower continues, people from every nation will gladly serve him, and he will never be replaced as ruler. Another prophecy in the book of Daniel foretold that Jesus would receive his kingdom at the end of a prophetic period of 7 times. Well, is that the case? Jesus would receive his kingdom at the end of a prophetic period of 7 times. Well, the Watchtower extrapolates that from this 2,520 years up till 1914, and that's when Jesus receives the kingdom. We're going to get into that in just a second, so put a pin in that. But let's look at a couple of texts, and let's see if what the Watchtower says is true. So these verses are going to prompt the question is, when was Jesus king? Or when did it become ruler? Matthew 20:18, Jesus said, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. How much authority? All authority. Sounds like only something a king can have is all authority. Look at Colossians 2:9 and 10. For in him, that being Jesus, all the fullness of deity dwells bodily, and in him you have been filled, who is the head over all rule and authority. Sounds like a ruler to me, and it sounds like this was in the first century. Look at Ephesians 1:20 and 21. It says, which he worked in Christ by raising him from the dead and seating him at his right hand in the heavenly places, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion and every name that is named, not only in this age, but also in the one to come. And he put all things in subjection under his feet and gave him his head over all things to the church. Okay, so is that enough biblical evidence to show that in the first century Jesus was ruling as king? I think it is. All right, paragraph 4. There's a read Daniel 4:10 through 17. All right, but let's read this paragraph first, because what the Watchtower is wanting you to do is to read this text first and then read their interpretation. And I'm not going to say whether this is something they're intentionally doing or not, right? But I think what this does as an effect is for you to kind of forget what you read in Daniel 4 and then look at paragraph 4 in this Watchtower and just buy into the Watchtower's interpretation. So we're going to do this the other way around. So, Watchtower says, the 7 times which is mentioned in Daniel 4, represent a period of 2,520 years. That time period began in 607 BCE, when the Babylonians removed the last king from Jehovah's throne in Jerusalem. It ended in 1914 CE, when Jehovah enthroned Jesus, the one who has the legal right as king of God's kingdom. Okay, so let's read Daniel 4:10 through 17 and see if it has anything to do with what was just said in paragraph 4. Now these were the visions in my head as I lay on my bed. I was looking, and behold, there was a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew large and became strong, and its height reached to the sky. And it was visible to the end of the whole earth. Its foliage was beautiful, and its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and the birds of the sky inhabited its branches, and all flesh fed itself from it. I was looking in the visions in my head as I lay on my bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, descended from heaven. He called out loudly and said thus, "Chop down the tree and cut off its branches, strip off its foliage and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee from under it, and the birds from its branches. Yet leave the stump with its roots in the earth, but with a band of iron and bronze around it, in the new grass of the field, and let him be drenched with the dew of heaven. And let him share with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from that of a man, and let the heart of a beast be given to him. And let 7 periods of time pass over him." Who is the him there? This edict is by the resolution of the watchers, and the decision is a command of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High is the powerful ruler over the kingdom of mankind, and gives it to whom he wishes, and sets up over it the lowliest of men. Okay, so what the Watchtower is reading into this is that these 7 times represent 2,520 years. Now, there's nothing in the text here about 2,520 years. So you've got that missing. But what the Watchtower wants you to do is completely leave the context. And just basically use this as a starting point, a springboard, to bounce you all the way over to 1914, when the text has just absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with that. It doesn't even have anything to do necessarily with when the kingdom is going to be established. Right? This prophecy is not directly related to that. Now, it is related to the fact that the living may know that the Most High is a powerful ruler over the kingdom of mankind. That doesn't mean that Yahweh became ruler at this point. He was already ruler. It's just that men would come to recognize it based on what happens in this vision. So, if we go to verse 16, it says, "Let 7 periods of time pass over him." Who is the him? It's clearly Nebuchadnezzar, because this dream is about Nebuchadnezzar. And the reason we know that is because of what this says. So let's go through a couple of these texts. So go down to verse 23. It says, "It is you, O king, for you have become great and strong, and your greatness has become even greater and reached to the sky, and your dominion to the kings of the earth." So this is the interpretation of the dream, and Daniel's saying, "It is you, O king. You're the one who this is talking about." So whatever these 7 periods are, or these 7 times are, this is for Nebuchadnezzar. And then go down to verse 25. It says, verse 24, "This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the resolution of the Most High, which has reached my lord the king, that you will be driven away from mankind, and your place of habitation be with the beasts of the field, and you be given grass to eat like cattle, and be drenched with the dew of heaven. And 7 periods of time will pass over you until you know that the Most High is the powerful ruler over the kingdom of mankind. Right? So clearly, this is talking about Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, unquestionably. Go down to verse 32. It says, "And you will be driven away from mankind, and your place of habitation will be with the beasts of the field." So, still talking about Nebuchadnezzar. Look at verse 33. "Immediately the word concerning Nebuchadnezzar was accomplished." And he was driven away from mankind, and it continues on from there. So verse 33 wraps all this up and says it was accomplished, and it was all throughout. All throughout. We can continue on. No, I think I did the last one there. Okay, yeah. All throughout. Went through a couple of these. All about Nebuchadnezzar. There's no extension beyond that. There's nothing in the text looking for a dual fulfillment or a greater fulfillment. That's just not there. So the Watchtower's whole idea about the kingdom being set up in 1914, if it's dependent in any way on Daniel 4, it completely collapses. Because you have all these chains, these links in this chain for the 1914 doctrine. And Daniel 4 is probably one of the biggest biggest links in this chain. When that link breaks, this whole chain breaks. It all comes crashing down. 1914 just does not work. It's a completely bogus and made up doctrine. Cannot be supported biblically. Paragraph 5, how can this prophecy benefit us? Knowing about the 7 times reassures us that Jehovah fulfills his promises right on time. Well, yeah, I agree with that. But if those promises are based on this idea of 1914, then no, Jehovah does not fulfill his promises right on time. Because there's nothing in the Bible about 1914. Okay. Let's go down to paragraph 6. Near the end of his earthly ministry, Jesus foretold certain world events that would help his followers know that he had begun ruling in heaven. Among other things, he mentioned wars, famines, and earthquakes. Now, catch this. He also foretold that there would be pestilences or diseases in one place after another, of which the recent COVID-19 pandemic is an example. These events are part of what the Bible calls the sign of Christ's presence. Okay. So what we have to look for is in Matthew 24. So Matthew 24:3, the disciples ask, "Tell us when these things happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" So you see that word sign there? You don't see that word sign again until verse 30, where it says, "And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn." We already read this text, but that's where the sign is. In Matthew 24, you don't see anything about the sign specifically when you're going back and you're looking at all of the stuff about wars, famines, and earthquakes. The word sign isn't used there. Yeah, so we see in verse 7. So Jesus says in verse 8, these things are a beginning of the birth pains, but none of those things in verses 4 through 8 are said to be a sign. But the Watchtower says those are a sign. Well, what about the passage in Luke? So if you go to Luke 21, okay. So if you go to the signs in Luke 21:10, it says, and he continues saying to them, this is Jesus talking, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. If we do a word search here, just so I don't miss anything. So for Luke 21, the only signs mentioned are signs from heaven. And then you go down to verse 25, Jesus says, and there will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and on the earth anguish among nations, and perplexity at the roaring of the seas and the waves. But specifically, though, the signs are referring to cosmic signs. Cosmic signs. Wars, famines, and earthquakes are not cosmic signs. So what the Watchtower says here is wrong, because they say these events, wars, famines, and earthquakes, are part of what the Bible calls the sign of Christ's presence. Nope. Not from what I just read, unless you have in your Bible another place where sign is used, specifically in relation to the wars, famines, and earthquakes. Nope, it's not there. The signs are the cosmic signs. Watchtowers is simply wrong there. Now, I thought it was interesting. They say read Revelation. This is the end of paragraph 6. They say read Revelation 6, 2 through 8. But what I want to point out specifically, verse 8. It says, then I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and he who sits on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. So as I understand it, the Watchtower's interpretation of most of Revelation is not talking about a very localized judgment, like just one city or even one state is getting the bulk of the judgment. As far as I understand it, it's a pretty wide scale. Globally, or at least multiple nations, right? That's how I understand it. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But notice this. Authority is given over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and famine and pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. A fourth? A fourth of the earth. Since 1914. Because what do they say? They say, all these events have occurred since Jesus took up kingdom power in 1914. So a fourth of the earth was killed with sword and famine and with pestilence and by wild beasts on the earth? Interesting. I'd like to see the statistics on that. Well, of course, we know the Watchtower is just going to take this symbolically, and this is just one of the problems with their interpretations on Revelation. They try to take some things literally, and then when it doesn't kind of suit them, they take it symbolically. Paragraph 7. Why did world conditions take a turn for the worse when Jesus became king? Now, this is probably, if there's like anything going for 1914, yeah, it would just have to be World War I, World War II. Yeah, terrible, horrible world events were happening. But aren't we told over and over again that things since 1914 are getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse? Since World Wars I and II, how many other world wars have happened since those that are as bad as those? Are things getting worse? Have we had anything like World War I and II in the past several decades? Yeah, we've had some bad wars, and there's still conflicts going on today. But we don't have anything like World War I and II. So you would think if the Watchtower is right, we'd have World Wars 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, world wars would be continually getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Because Watchtower says over and over again, things are going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Like we're on this downhill trajectory. But I would really question that, whether we really are on that trajectory. I'm not saying that things aren't vulnerable and there aren't bad things happening in the world today. Certainly there are. There's terrible conflicts happening. Yes. But let me just ask you, in terms of just like overall safety and wellness and well-being, would you rather be on the earth today, or would you have rather been on the earth in, I don't know, 1915, right? 1916, the early 1920s. In between World War I and World War II, would you rather be getting placed in that decade or two of time than today? Or do you feel generally safer living in the world today than people would have been living in the world back then? I mean, what was the life expectancy of people back then? And what's the life expectancy of today? Even with all of the diseases and everything, right? We've got so many great treatments for all these things, and life expectancy seems to be going up, and people are finding ways to be healthy and to be safe and to be well. Interesting things to think about and contemplate. Okay, let's go down to paragraph 8. How can these prophecies benefit us? World events and the noticeable change in people's attitude would help us discern that Jesus has become king. How so? How? They're not answering that. How do these things help us to discern that Jesus has become king? Do you know how I discern that Jesus has become king? I go to the scriptures I just read. Matthew 28, Ephesians chapter 2, Colossians chapter 1. That's how I discern that Jesus has become king. I'm not going and looking out into the world to find evidence that Jesus has become king. That's not what the Bible's prompting us to do. I'm taking Jesus at his word. Then they say, so rather than become upset when we see people act selfishly and hatefully, we remember that their actions are fulfilling Bible prophecies. I don't think many Jehovah's Witnesses are going to catch this. I don't think they're going to really catch this. So look at what they're saying here. Don't become upset when people act hatefully? Where's that in the Bible? Isn't there such a thing as righteous anger? So when you see injustice is happening, you're not supposed to get upset about that? Are you supposed to just have a straight face and just say, oh, well, that's just fulfilling Bible prophecy. You know, no problem. Right? Do you see what the Watchtower is doing? I mean, the more I think about it, the more disgusting this is. That they're trying to actually desensitize you from the hate that we see in the world today. But let me tell you, you don't want to be desensitized. You don't want to be desensitized. And the Bible does not tell you to be desensitized and to just look out in this hateful world that we live in and just say, that's just filling Bible prophecy, right? Nothing to see here. It's almost like the Watchtower is just waving their hand at this. Don't believe that. When you see injustice happening, you should get upset. And I think that upsetting that is in you is a righteous upsetting that should prompt you to do something if you can. Should prompt you to do something if you can. Not just ignore it and leave it to saying this is a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Wow, yeah, that's the more I talk about it and describe it, the more disgusting it sounds to me. Paragraph 9. Read Daniel 2:28 in 31 through 35. So let's do that. However, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the last days. This was your dream and the visions of your head while on your bed. And they say read 31 through 35. You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great image. That image, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was rising up in front of you. So, notice the pronouns here, you. That's Nebuchadnezzar. And its appearance was awesome. The head of that image was made of fine gold, its breast and its armor of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Now, let's read what the Watchtower says, and then let's read what the interpretation of this dream is. Because what do we see here? We see the dream here, but look at what verse 36 says. And this is the part that Watchtower doesn't cite. It says, "This was the dream. Now we will say its interpretation before the king." So what follows is the interpretation. Okay, so let's read paragraph 9. We see this prophecy being fulfilled today. Nebuchadnezzar's dream pointed to what would happen in the final part of the days after the start of Christ's rule. The final part of the days, where is that in the Bible? Jesus' earthly enemies would include the final world power foretold in the Bible, the one represented by the feet of iron and clay. This world power has already appeared. It came into existence during World War I when Britain and the United States forged a special partnership, the Anglo-American Alliance. Nebuchadnezzar's dream image also foretold at least two things about this world power that would distinguish it from the previous kingdoms. Okay. So that's what the Watchtower says this dream is, as far as the interpretation goes. Well, we've got to read verses 36 through 45 to see what the interpretation actually is. Because it would have helped if the Watchtower said, read Daniel 2:28 through verse 45. Because you have the dream and then the interpretation. But instead of going with the interpretation here by Daniel, the Watchtower just makes up their own interpretation in paragraph 9. So let's start reading here. Verse 36, Daniel chapter 2. This was the dream. Now we will say its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And whenever the sons of men inhabit, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand, and has made you rule with power over them all. You are the head of gold. So, we already have one aspect of this dream identified or interpreted. The Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold. And then notice in verse 39, but after you. So, I mean, this is so simple. The dream is talking about Nebuchadnezzar, and then after Nebuchadnezzar, sequential events. And I hate to dumb this down, but you kind of have to, because the Watchtower has just taken this and run with it and extrapolated this interpretation into thousands of years into the future. I'm going with what the Bible says, where it says, "But after you, there will arise another kingdom inferior to you, then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule with power over all the earth. Then there will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. Now in that you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom. But it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so some of the kingdom will be strong, and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men. But they will not cling to one another, even as iron does not combine with clay. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will cause a kingdom to rise up which will never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it itself will stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will happen in the future, or after this. So the dream is certain, and its interpretation is trustworthy. So I read all that so that you didn't just have to buy into what the Watchtower said, because they're not expecting you to read what I just read. They're not expecting you to read what I just read. But this interpretation is here, and these are kingdoms following Nebuchadnezzar. And how do you find out what those are? I mean, you could literally open up any history book based on archaeology, written history, written records, and you can just see the kingdoms that followed Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. So you can look these up for yourself, but I'll just list those out. So the kingdom after Nebuchadnezzar is the Medes and Persians. And after that, the Seleucid Empire. And that's after the Medes and Persians, going all the way up to 64 AD. Then after the Seleucid Empire, that's where you have the Roman Empire fully established, right? So those are the kingdoms. Those are the kingdoms. So it's not super hard, right? It's not super hard if you just look at the language and see that here's what follows, and these are just sequential events. There's just nothing in the text to lead you to extrapolate some kind of dual fulfillment or whatever to look at events today or in the past 100 years even. Nothing whatsoever in the text. Let's look at paragraph 12. How can this prophecy benefit us? Daniel's prophecy provides additional evidence that we are living in the time of the end. More than 2,500 years ago, Daniel foretold that after Babylon, 4 other world powers would have a significant impact on God's people. Furthermore, he revealed that the Anglo-American world power would be the last of these. This gives us comfort and hope that soon God's kingdom will sweep away every trace of human rule and take full charge of the earth. Now, here's the problem when you start to extrapolate these prophecies and you try to find different things today that you think fits those prophecies when that was never the intention of the prophecy to begin with. So they're saying that the Anglo-American world power would be the last of these. How do they know that? How do they know that? The governing body, that is. How do they know that with full assurance? What happens when the Anglo-American world power goes under and then another empire totally different takes its place? What then do you do? And this is the problem with futurism, and not just with the Jehovah's Witnesses, the others. You've got to constantly shift and change your position as things develop. And do you think that you're the only ones who have done this in history? I mean, other Christians centuries ago, with similar futurist interpretations, have tried to apply different prophecies to their day, to a certain world power or to the Pope or something. And when those things fall through, what do you have to do? You've got to kind of reinvent things and come up with a whole new set of prophecies to fit this new empire that fits this verse over here and that verse over there. You're just constantly shifting things. And this is one thing that is more attractive about the preterist position, is that things don't change like that because things have already happened in the past. So all you have to do is just look at the past and look at prophecies like this in Daniel chapter 2 and look at the kingdoms following Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, maybe that's not exciting to some people, but is it the best interpretation or is it not? Well, it seems like it is the best interpretation. All right, paragraph 13. Read Revelation 7, 19 through 12. I'm sorry, 17, 19 through 12. Revelation 7, 9 through 12. Here's the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And they are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other is not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. And the beast which was and is not, is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. So, let's see what the Watchtower says. The destruction caused by World War I led to the fulfillment of yet another Bible prophecy about the last days. World leaders wanted to ensure future world peace, so in January 1920, they established the League of Nations, which was replaced by the United Nations in October 1945. This organization is called an 8th king, but it is not a world power. Its strength and influence depends on the political powers that support it. The Bible symbolically refers to those powers as 10 kings. Okay, so if you want to know my, in more detail, interpretation of Revelation chapter 17, look at my videos or podcasts from a few weeks ago where I did at least several pretty in-depth podcasts about Revelation. I went through Revelation 17 pretty specifically, but if you aren't going to go check this out, I'll give you my brief commentary here on Revelation 17, 9 through 12. So, verse 9, the 7 heads are from Revelation 13, 1. And that's the 7 Roman emperors or empires, beginning with Julius Caesar and all of those going down through Galba and ending with Galba. In verse 10, the one who is Nero, and the other one who has not yet come is Galba, and he rules for a short while. And then verse 11, the 8th is the Flavian dynasty. Verse 12, those 10 horns mentioned are from Revelation 13:1. And those are the 7 Roman emperors. Oops, I lost it. Those are the 7 Roman emperors plus 3 more to make 10. And those 3 additional ones are Veltelins, not pronouncing that right, and Vespasian. Okay, so that's my brief summary of who this is. So this is talking about events in the 1st century. Okay, because in John, early in the book of Revelation, said these are things which must soon take place, must shortly come to pass, in language like that. Okay, so I take that to mean these are things that are happening within the lifetime of John. Okay. All right, paragraph 14. Read Revelation 17, 3 through 5. So let's do that. And he carried me away in the Spirit into a wilderness. Then I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. So they say in paragraph 14, under divine inspiration, the Apostle John saw a vision of a prostitute, Babylon the Great, which symbolizes the world empire of false religion. What does the vision reveal? False religious organizations have long cooperated closely with the world's political powers and have given them their blessing. Soon, Jehovah will put into the hearts of the political powers to carry out his thought. With what result? Those political powers, the 10 kings, will turn on false religious organizations and destroy them. So, who is Babylon the Great? Well, I think there's some clues. If you go back to Revelation 11:8, notice what it says. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. So Sodom and Egypt, this is a great city, right? And look at Isaiah 1:10. This is really interesting. Hear the word of Yahweh, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear to the law of God, you people of Gomorrah. What are your multiplied sacrifices to me, says Yahweh? I have had enough burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fed cattle. And he says, I take no pleasure in them. Who is he talking to? He's talking to the Jewish people, right? The Jewish people in that city, Jerusalem, is spiritually called Sodom and Gomorrah. And if you go all throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, you're going to find harlot used of the Jewish people time and time and time again. All this stuff about harlotry, all throughout. Do your own word search. You can see this for yourself. So that leads me to think that Babylon the Great in the first century is actually talking about apostate Jerusalem, the Jewish people who rejected their Messiah. That is Babylon the Great. And did the Jewish people at that time, especially the Jewish leaders, have close ties with the political powers? Well, yeah, they certainly did. They certainly did. All right, let's move forward a little bit here and let's wrap it up. Look at this in paragraph 17. In fulfillment of that prophecy, today a considerable number of people have abandoned false religion and have begun looking elsewhere for answers. I would really like more details on what exactly that means. Now, a lot of people have certainly abandoned religion, right? There's less churchgoers and things like that, and people are kind of going into secularism and apathy, not necessarily atheism, but just secularism or religious apathy. I mean, so that kind of thing is happening, but that's still religion. Maybe it's not formal, but it's still religion. So what exactly do they mean by this in paragraph 17? Now, they're not looking at Jehovah's Witnesses, I'll tell you that much. Not most people, anyway. Paragraph 16. How can these prophecies benefit us? The appearance of the United Nations and the decline of support for false religion add to the evidence that we are living in the last days. How so? Well, this is really circular reasoning, because the Watchtower says, well, these passages in Revelation are talking about the United Nations. And we see all this today happening about the United Nations. Therefore, it's the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. You see how circular that is? It just doesn't work. Not to mention the 10 years that the Watchtower was associated with the United Nations as an NGO. Let's always mention that everywhere we can. Paragraph 17. We have received insight into the prophecies about our time. They cite here Daniel 12. The accuracy of those prophecies leaves us in awe of Jehovah's and his inspired word. So continue to fortify your faith by diligently studying the scriptures. So Daniel chapter 12, let's check this out. I'm not going to go into this in great detail. But you will see in Daniel chapter 12:4, which is mentioned here, you have the time of the end mentioned. I believe that is referring to the Jewish age leading up to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Now, why do I say that? Well, if you go back to Daniel 9, and you go all the way down to verse 24, this is where you have the 70 weeks prophecy. So look at what it says in Daniel 9:24. 70 weeks have been determined for your people and your holy city. So talking about Daniel and the Jewish people to finish transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, and to bring everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the holy of holies. So you are to know and to have insight that from going out of a word to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince. Notice that, until Messiah the Prince. So it's prophecies concerning Daniel and his people until Messiah the Prince. Obviously, it's talking about Jesus. Then there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be restored and rebuilt. What's it talking about? It's talking about the temple with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Then after 62 weeks, so after the temple is built, after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. What does that sound like? It sounds like when the Messiah was crucified, right? And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So Messiah is crucified, then Jerusalem is destroyed. And its end will come like a flood. Even to the end there will be war, desolations are decreed. Notice this. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will make sacrifice and grain offering cease. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction. One that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So it's talking about the destruction of the temple, the rebuilding of the temple, the coming of the Messiah, and the cutting off of the Messiah. Now, obviously, that's not the end of the Messiah, because we know from Daniel 7 that the Messiah is given a kingdom and will rule forever. So Daniel 9 isn't giving us the full picture. But what I'm doing is trying to tie in the end mentioned in Daniel 12 with the end spoken here in Daniel chapter 9. The end of the Jewish age. That's what this is referring to. But the Watchtower and other futurists want to extrapolate this well into the future, into our day, where we have to keep on saying soon, 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 time of the end, final part of the last days. You're on this hamster wheel, just spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning. And that's the problem with this theology. So I would just commend you to do what the Watchtower says here. Fortify your faith by diligently studying the scriptures and helping others to develop an approved relationship with Jehovah. I would add to that in the relationship with Jesus Christ, which is eternal life according to John 17:3. Knowing Jesus, knowing God, studying the scriptures, not taking my word for it, not taking the Watchtower's word for it, testing everything that we say up against what the scriptures teach, asking questions, trying to get insight, trying to figure this stuff out. That is what I'm commending all of you to do today. A lot of this may not have made sense. That is okay. Don't give up. Please keep on studying. Ask me questions. I would love to speak with you about any of this. So leave your comments below. Leave your questions below. Contact me privately. Go down to the show notes or the video description. And there's a number of ways for you to contact me, whether it's through my website, which shoots me an email. We can talk on WhatsApp, and we can talk on Skype. I've been leaving my Skype off on accident. I thought it was giving me notifications, but it hasn't. But I'm starting to leave my Skype up regularly now. So if you want to talk to me via Skype, I should be there. So connect with me. Be happy to discuss anything with you. So privately, if you want to do that, that's totally understandable. You can remain anonymous. I won't share any of your information with anyone. So we can keep our conversations private if you like. If you want to support this work, please consider hitting the thumbs up icon, subscribing to this channel, and what's the other one? Thumbs up, subscribe, hitting the notification bell. That was the third one. That really helps out with the algorithm so this work can be recognized, because as we all know, there's a lot of secular channels out there promoting content about the Jehovah's Witnesses in a negative way. But it's so important that channels that are from a Christian perspective get recognized. So that's really the best way for you to support this, and also just by sharing this material with someone who needs to see it or hear it. We also have this on Apple and Spotify if you want to listen to this via podcast. And lastly, if you want to support this work financially, we do have a Patreon set up where you can become a monthly supporter. $5, $10, every little bit helps. It really helps keep up with the expenses, which are basically monthly now. That's what the servers are costing. So if you want to help me to keep the lights on, that would be awesome. Do the Patreon thing. Otherwise, if you can't, totally fine, no problem. Thank you for all of you who support this ministry in every way. I'm just so encouraged by everyone's comments and just your encouragement. Thank you so much for all of that. So, hope you all have a great week, and we will see you next week. For more information about Jehovah's Witnesses and other topics, please visit michaeljfelker.com. There you can also reach me directly to submit questions or comments to be covered on the JW Review. To subscribe to this podcast, please go to iTunes and search for the JW Review.